We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. A Perfect Facade. James Harper wiped sweat from his brow as he trimmed the last hedge in Mrs. Peterson's garden. The June heat pressed against his skin, but satisfaction coursed through him as he surveyed his work. At 42, he still insisted on handling some clients personally, especially loyal ones like Mrs. Peterson, who'd trusted Harper Landscaping since his father's time. "Jim, dear, you shouldn't work so hard," Mrs. Peterson called from her porch, a glass of lemonade in hand. "That's what you have employees for." He grinned, collecting his tools. "Some things need a personal touch," Mrs. P. Dad always said. "That's what sets us apart." "Your father would be proud," she said, her voice softening. "Both your parents would be." The mention of his parents stirred memories Jim usually kept buried. 21 years had passed since the accident, but sometimes the loss felt fresh as yesterday. He'd been barely out of his teens when he inherited the family business, forcing him to grow up overnight. "Madison's graduation is next week, isn't it?" Mrs. Peterson asked, breaking into his thoughts. How time flies. Seems like yesterday. She was running through these gardens with her little watering can. "Next Saturday," Jim confirmed, pride warming his voice. "She's heading to Princeton in the fall. Full scholarship. Just like her mother," Mrs. Peterson nodded. "Trish must be thrilled." Jim's smile faltered slightly. "She is. Planning a big graduation party, too." Back in his truck, Jim's thoughts drifted to his wife. Patricia Harper, known to everyone as Trish, had been acting strange lately. Phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. Girls' nights out that left no trace on social media. Small things that wouldn't bother most husbands, but Jim noticed patterns. He developed that skill after losing his parents, watching for signs of trouble before it struck. He pulled into their driveway, noting Trish's BMW was gone again. The colonial-style house loomed before him, picture-perfect with its manicured lawn and white trim. They bought it right after marriage, when Trish insisted on moving to the right neighborhood. Back then, he found her focus on appearances endearing. Inside, Madison sat at the kitchen island, textbooks spread around her laptop. She glanced up briefly, then returned to her screen without greeting. "Studying hard?" Jim asked, washing his hands at the sink. "Obviously," she muttered, not looking up. "Want to grab dinner? Your mom's out, and I could use some father-daughter time." Madison sighed dramatically. "I can't. Meeting Ashley to work on our valedictorian speeches." "Both of you are giving speeches?" "I'm salutatorian," she snapped. "Thanks for remembering." Jim frowned. "Madison, I didn't—" "Whatever. I'm already late." She gathered her things, movements sharp with irritation. "Mom's right. You never pay attention to what really matters." The words stung more than they should have. Jim watched her leave, wondering when his daughter had become a stranger. He'd worked so hard to give her everything he'd lost: security, opportunities, a future without struggle. Somewhere along the way, it seemed he'd given her everything except understanding. His phone buzzed with a text from Trish. "Working late." "Don't wait up." "Working late." The hospital where she volunteered had become her frequent excuse lately. Jim opened his laptop, logging into the security system he'd installed months ago. The cameras showed empty rooms, normal activity. But something caught his eye in the footage from 2 days ago. Trish in her home office, speaking intensely on the phone. He increased the volume. "Rick, we need to be careful. He's not as stupid as you think." "Rick." Mayor Richard Donovan, whose campaign Trish had volunteered for last year. Jim had noticed how often his wife mentioned the mayor's name at dinner parties, how she lit up when discussing his initiatives. He dismissed it as political enthusiasm. Jim opened another window, pulling up Madison's birth certificate, the document that had started his suspicions 3 months ago when he found discrepancies in the hospital records. He'd been reviewing old papers for insurance purposes when he noticed the irregularities. Small things: wrong attending physician, inconsistent timestamps. The kind of details most people would miss. The front door opened, and Jim quickly closed the windows. Madison strode through the kitchen, heading for the stairs. "Thought you were meeting Ashley," he called out. "Changed my mind," she replied, not slowing down. Jim listened to her footsteps overhead, then the slam of her bedroom door. From his study, he could hear her voice, muffled but animated. Another secret phone call, another piece of the puzzle he wasn't meant to solve. He opened his safe, removing a thick folder labeled Family Documents. Inside, carefully organized, lay the evidence he'd gathered. Bank statements showing unusual transfers, photos from his private investigator, transcripts of conversations that made his stomach turn. The man in the mirror caught his attention, still fit from physical work, lines around his eyes the only sign of age. His father had been younger when he died, leaving Jim to navigate adulthood alone. Now, decades later, he faced another kind of loss. But this time, he'd be ready. His phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. Meeting confirmed for Father's Day brunch. Plan proceeding as discussed. The message wasn't meant for him. His security system had intercepted it from Trish's secondary phone, the one she thought he didn't know about. Jim added the message to his folder, another piece of evidence in the case he was building. Upstairs, Madison laughed at something in her phone call. The sound reminded him of her childhood giggles, before distance and secrets crept between them. Before Trish's influence had turned their daughter against him. Jim closed the folder, securing it in the safe. Father's Day was approaching, the day they planned to blindside him with divorce papers and accusations. They expected him to crumble, to become the villain in their story. But they'd forgotten something crucial. Jim Harper had learned survival at 21, standing over his parents' graves. He'd built a business from grief, constructed a life from loss. And he'd be damned if he'd let anyone destroy what he'd worked so hard to protect. The evening stretched ahead, quiet except for Madison's muffled conversation and the distant hum of traffic. In his study, surrounded by evidence of betrayal, Jim began reviewing his counterattack. Let them think him blind. Let them believe their plan was foolproof. Sunday would bring more than just Father's Day. It would bring the beginning of a reckoning none of them would see coming. Chapter 2. Shattered Illusions. The morning of Father's Day dawned bright and clear, but Jim had been awake for hours. He'd spent the early morning reviewing his files one last time, ensuring every document was in place. Now he stood in the kitchen, preparing breakfast as he had countless Sundays before. Something smells good, Trish's voice carried from the doorway. She wore her favorite summer dress, hair and makeup perfect despite the early hour. Blueberry pancakes, Jim replied, not turning around. Madison's favorite. You didn't have to go to all this trouble. Trish moved closer, placing a hand on his arm. It's your special day, after all. The touch felt foreign now, knowing what he knew. Jim managed to smile. Just keeping tradition. Madison appeared, already dressed for brunch. Mom, did you remember the thing? Later, sweetie, Trish said smoothly. Let's enjoy breakfast first. They settled around the table, a picture of domestic harmony. Jim watched them exchange glances, noted the barely concealed excitement in their expressions. They thought they were being subtle. These are really good, Dad, Madison offered, her tone almost genuine. Remember when you used to make them shaped like Mickey Mouse? You were 6, Jim nodded. Couldn't start the day without your Disney pancakes. That was before you got too busy for breakfast, she added, the warmth vanishing from her voice. Trish jumped in before Jim could respond. Speaking of busy, how's the Peterson account? Same as always. Mrs. P's garden is my personal project. Still doing manual labor? Trish's disapproval was clear. You own the company, Jim. It's beneath you. Nothing's beneath me when it comes to the business, he replied evenly. Dad taught me that. Yes, well, your father ran a different kind of operation, Trish said. Times change. The dig at his family business didn't surprise him anymore. Trish had always seen Harper Landscaping as something to be elevated, refined, just as she'd seen Jim himself as a project to be improved. I have something for you, Madison announced, pushing back from the table. She returned with a wrapped package, setting it before him with exaggerated care. Jim opened it slowly, already knowing what he'd find. A leather wallet, expensive but not the kind he'd choose for himself. It's beautiful, thank you. Check inside, Madison urged, barely containing her smirk. He opened the wallet, finding it empty except for a single envelope. Looking up, he met Trish's triumphant gaze. "You're just not worth the trouble anymore," she declared, voice dripping false sympathy. "We've decided you need to be free of us." Jim removed the divorce papers, scanning them with deliberate calmness. The accusations were exactly as he'd expected: emotional abuse, financial control, neglect. They crafted their narrative carefully. "I've been expecting this," he said quietly, reaching for his briefcase. Trish's confidence wavered slightly. "What do you mean?" Jim placed his own documents on the table. "Madison isn't my biological daughter. I've known for months." The color drained from Trish's face while Madison's expression shifted from smugness to confusion. "That's ridiculous," Trish stammered. "You can't prove." "DNA test results," Jim continued, laying out more papers, along with hospital records showing inconsistencies in Madison's birth certificate. "Would you like to explain that?" Madison grabbed the papers, her hands shaking. "Mom? What's he talking about?" "He's lying," Trish snapped. "Your father's trying to manipulate us. Just like always." "I've already removed Madison from my will and trust funds," Jim continued calmly. "And thanks to our state's fault-based divorce laws, your affair means you won't see a cent of my assets." He opened a thick folder containing surveillance photos, Trish meeting Mayor Donovan in various locations, entering his private residence, leaving late at night. "You've been watching me?" Trish's voice rose with indignation. "I've been protecting myself," Jim corrected, "including from your plans to frame me for embezzlement." Madison stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You think you're so smart? You'll regret this." "Leave my house," Jim commanded, his voice hardening. "Both of you. You have 30 minutes to pack what you can carry. You can't just throw us out," Trish protested. "Unless you prefer I call the police now and show them what I found in your bedroom." The reference to their hidden documents finally broke their resistance. As they hurried upstairs, Jim made 2 calls, first to his lawyer, then to his bank. Within minutes, he'd initiated the transfer of liquid assets to secure accounts and changed the passwords to his business operations. He moved through the house methodically, removing family photos and personal items that might have legal significance. In the kitchen, he found Madison's college acceptance letters, adding them to his files. Evidence, all of it, of the life they'd planned to destroy. Footsteps on the stairs announced their return. Trish and Madison appeared with hastily packed suitcases, their faces a mixture of fury and fear. Through the window, Jim spotted Mayor Donovan's SUV waiting in the street. "This isn't over," Trish declared, pausing at the door. "We'll make you pay for this." Jim met her gaze steadily. "No, Trish. This is exactly where it begins." He watched them load their belongings into Donovan's vehicle, noting how the mayor stayed behind the wheel, avoiding eye contact. Smart man, keeping his distance, but not smart enough to realize he'd chosen the wrong family to destroy. Once they'd driven away, Jim returned to his study. His phone was already buzzing with notifications, the first wave of their counterattack beginning. A local news station wanted comment on allegations of financial misconduct. Anonymous tips about prescription drug abuse. Jim settled into his chair, surrounded by evidence of their betrayal, and began implementing the next phase of his plan. They thought they'd blindsided him, but he'd spent months preparing for this moment. Now it was his turn to strike, and he would show no mercy. The war had begun, but only one side knew the full extent of the battlefield. And Jim Harper intended to win. Chapter 3: Seeds of Retribution. Vincent Vinnie Moretti's office smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes, despite the prominently displayed no smoking sign. The retired private investigator studied the photos spread across his desk, whistling softly. "You've been busy, Jim," he remarked, picking up a particularly damning image of Mayor Donovan entering a motel with Trish. "These are professional quality. I learned from the best," Jim replied. "Remember when you helped track down those suppliers who were scamming my father?" Vinny nodded, touching the scar on his neck. "Your old man saved my Tommy from jail time." Harper men understand loyalty. "I need your connections, Vinny. Both sides of the law. You're going after Donovan?" Vinny leaned back, concern crossing his weathered features. "He's got friends in dark places, Jim. So do you." The old investigator chuckled. "True enough. What exactly are you looking for?" Jim pulled out a list of names. These businesses have been pressured into supporting Donovan's re-election campaign. I want to know who else he's strong-armed, who's willing to talk. Could be dangerous information. Vinny mused, but Jim saw the interest sparked in his eyes. Give me 48 hours. Across town, Sarah Chin sat in her small apartment, surrounded by notes and documents. The former journalist had been skeptical when Jim first approached her, but the evidence he'd provided was irrefutable. The paper killed your series on municipal corruption, Jim had reminded her. Want to know why? Now she studied bank records showing suspicious transfers between Mayor Donovan's campaign fund and various shell companies. The connections were there, hidden but traceable. Her phone buzzed. Another text from Jim. Check property records for Harvey Klein Development Corporation. Sarah pulled up the database, and her eyes widened. Multiple properties purchased through subsidiaries, all coincidentally near planned city development projects. The pieces were falling into place. Meanwhile, at the country club, Margaret Hayes sipped wine and pretended not to notice Rick Donovan at the bar. The interior had been one of his earliest conquests, discarded when he set his sights on Trish Harper. Mrs. Hayes? A waiter appeared with a phone. Call for you at the front desk. In the lobby, she recognized Jim Harper's voice immediately. Margaret, I know what he did to you. There are others. Her hand tightened on the receiver. I'm listening. Back at his office, Jim reviewed the growing web of connections on his computer screen. Laura Bennett, the real estate agent who'd handled Donovan's private purchases. Diane Carter, the former campaign manager who'd mysteriously resigned. Each woman had a story, each one a potential ally. His phone rang. Vinny. You were right about the business owners. Just met with Stephen Chun from Golden Dragon Restaurant. Says Donovan's people threatened his licenses unless he donated to the campaign. Give me a meeting, Jim instructed. And Vinny? Check into Harvey Klein. Something's not right there. The investigation into Klein revealed an ambitious developer frustrated with Donovan's inability to deliver promised zoning changes. A man whose patience and loyalty might be wearing thin. Jim's network expanded daily. Each connection strengthened his position, each piece of evidence another weapon in his arsenal. But the true challenge lay in timing, revealing enough to pressure his enemies while holding back the killing blows. At home, he monitored the security feeds showing Trish and Madison at their temporary apartment. His daughter's social media posts had turned vicious, painting him as a controlling monster. The comment section filled with sympathetic responses, none aware of the truth behind their accusations. You're sure about this surveillance? Mark Thompson asked, studying the feeds on Jim's computer. His business partner shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Seems extreme. They're planning something bigger, Jim replied, noting Mark's nervous fidgeting. Trish met with Harvey Klein yesterday. The developer? Mark's voice cracked slightly. What would he want with her? Jim watched his partner's reaction carefully. That's what I intend to find out. After Mark left, Jim reviewed the footage again. Something about his partner's behavior raised red flags, the same instinct that had warned him about Trish's betrayal. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel, his half-sister. Trish called, asking questions about Dad's estate. Jim hadn't spoken to Rachel since their parents' funeral. The rift between them, born from complicated family dynamics, had never healed. But now she might be his key to protecting their father's legacy. Don't tell her anything, he texted back. I'll explain soon. Through his network of contacts, Jim learned that Trish had been meeting regularly with a group of influential women, wives of local businessmen and politicians. She was building her own support system, preparing for the public battle ahead. Sarah Chin's investigation revealed more connections. The zoning board approved 3 controversial projects last month, she reported. All tied to Klein's companies, all supported by Donovan. Follow the money, Jim instructed. Klein's not known for his patience. The developer's reputation for aggressive tactics worried Jim. If Klein was involved, the threat went beyond personal revenge. They were after his business, his properties, everything he'd built. Vinny's sources confirmed his fears. Klein's been buying up properties around your major project sites, the investigator reported. And guess who's been facilitating the deals? Trish, Jim answered, the pieces clicking into place. Through a series of shell companies. She's been busy since leaving. Jim pulled up the security footage from Trish's home office, recorded weeks before their confrontation. The video showed her studying documents, making calls, preparing for this moment long before she served the divorce papers. Madison's voice carried from one recording. "But what if he figures it out?" "Your father sees what he wants to see," Trish had assured her. "Trust Rick. He knows how to handle men like him." The manipulation of his daughter cut deepest. Jim watched hours of footage showing Trish poisoning Madison's mind, twisting every memory, every interaction, until he became the villain in her story. His phone lit up with another message, an anonymous tip about his company's financial practices sent to the local business journal. The first shot in their public campaign to destroy him. "They're moving faster than expected," Vinny warned. "Klein's people have been asking questions about your permits, looking for weaknesses." Jim opened his safe, reviewing the evidence he'd gathered. Photos, documents, recordings, ammunition for the war ahead. But timing would be crucial. Release too much too soon, and they'd adapt their strategy. Wait too long, and they might land a killing blow. Set up meetings with the other women, he instructed Vinny. Margaret, Laura, Diane, all of them. It's time they knew they weren't alone. The retired investigator nodded grimly. "And Klein? Let him think his plan is working. A desperate man makes mistakes." As night fell, Jim stood at his study window, watching the street below. Somewhere out there, Trish and Madison were plotting their next move, believing they had the upper hand. Mayor Donovan was probably with them, offering false promises and empty assurances. They thought they were dismantling his life piece by piece. Instead, they were walking into a trap years in the making. Jim had learned survival at 21, standing over his parents' graves. Now, at 42, he would teach them all about consequences. The seeds of retribution had been planted. Soon, they would discover just how deep the roots could grow. Chapter 4. The Web Titans. Sarah Chun stared at her computer screen, rereading the evidence for the 10th time. The network of corruption she'd uncovered stretched far beyond Willow Creek's borders. Mayor Rick Donovan hadn't just been running affairs. He'd been operating a sophisticated protection racket through Harvey Klein's real estate empire. "Look at this," she said, turning the screen toward Jim Harper. "These properties aren't just safe houses for his liaisons. They're distribution points." Jim leaned closer, studying the map she'd created. Red dots marked Klein's properties, each strategically positioned near small businesses that had reported pressure from city officials. "How many businesses are we talking about?" 37 confirmed cases, Sarah replied, pulling up a spreadsheet. "Most are family-owned restaurants, shops, service providers. The pattern's clear. They get cited for code violations until they agree to support Donovan's campaign." Jim's phone buzzed with a text from Vinny. Margaret Hayes came through. "You need to see this." At her design studio, Margaret laid out a series of blueprints. "These are the renovation plans Rick commissioned last year. Notice anything strange?" Jim studied the documents, noting the detailed specifications for hidden safes, surveillance equipment, and soundproofing. "These aren't just safe houses. They're control centers," Margaret confirmed. "I designed 5 of them before I realized what was happening. Each one has a dedicated room for storing documents, blackmail material, I assume. Who else knows about these?" Laura Bennett handled all the real estate transactions. And Diane Carter. She saw one of the properties while working on Rick's campaign. That's why she quit. Jim made another call. "Vinny, get Laura and Diane here. Now." Within an hour, the 3 women sat in Margaret's office, sharing their pieces of the puzzle. Laura brought property records, showing how Klein's companies had systematically acquired buildings near targeted businesses. "The price points were suspicious," Laura explained. "Way above market value. I thought Klein was just overpaying to close deals quickly. But now, he needed specific locations," Diane interjected. "I saw the targeting maps in Rick's office. They planned the pressure points months in advance." Sarah arrived with more evidence. "Look at these bank transfers. Each property purchase corresponds with a spike in campaign donations from nearby businesses." "Klein's getting impatient," Jim noted. "My sources say he's unhappy with Rick's progress on the zoning changes." "He should be," Laura said. 3 major projects are stalled because Rick can't deliver. The investors are asking questions. Jim's phone lit up with another message. this time from Mark Thompson's wife, Elizabeth. Need to talk. Urgent. Meet at the old coffee shop. Elizabeth sat in a corner booth, hands wrapped around an untouched cup of coffee. Mark's been acting strange, making large withdrawals, taking calls in private. I found this in his office. She slid a folder across the table. Inside, Jim found records of substantial gambling debts and emails discussing payments to offshore accounts. How long has this been going on? At least a year, Elizabeth whispered. But it got worse after Trish left you. She knows about his addiction. I think she's using it against him. Jim thought about his business partner's recent behavior, the nervous glances, the excessive interest in company finances. Has he mentioned Harvey Klein? Elizabeth's face paled. He met with Klein's people last week. Said it was about a potential contract, but you don't believe him. She shook her head. Mark's terrified of something. Or someone. Back at his office, Jim reviewed the growing web of connections. Mark's vulnerability created a dangerous weak point in his defenses. If Trish and Rick were leveraging his partner's gambling debts. His phone rang. Rachel. Jim, you need to see this. Trish approached Aunt Helen about investing in some exciting new business ventures with Rick. She's targeting the families, not just Helen. She's been calling all the older relatives, talking about guaranteed returns. Rick even hosted a dinner party for them. Jim felt his jaw tighten. How many invested? At least 5 that I know of. Helen put in her entire retirement fund. The pieces clicked into place. Klein's stalled projects, the pressure on local businesses, Mark's gambling debts, all connected through an intricate web of manipulation and fear. His security system pinged with an alert. The cameras caught Madison entering her old house, using a key she claimed to return. She moved purposefully through rooms, collecting documents and photos. Jim watched her pause in his study, attempting to access his computer. The password attempts triggered another alert. Whatever she was looking for, she left empty-handed. Sarah called with more revelations. The shell companies Klein used? They're registered to addresses matching Rick's safe houses. They're not even trying to hide the connections anymore. They think they don't need to, Jim replied. That's their weakness. He pulled up the photos from Vinny's surveillance. Rick meeting with business owners, Klein's representatives making threats, money changing hands in parking lots. Evidence of corruption so blatant, it would be almost impossible to dismiss. Margaret texted, Rick's planning something big. He just commissioned 3 more renovations, rush jobs. Forward me the details, Jim instructed. And Margaret? Thank you. For everything. He destroyed my life, she replied. Time to return the favor. Jim opened his laptop, reviewing the files Sarah had compiled. The investigation had uncovered more than just adultery and corruption. It revealed a systematic campaign to control Willow Creek through fear and manipulation. His phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. Meeting tonight. Klein's office. Plan B in motion. The text had been meant for Rick, intercepted by Jim's surveillance. Plan B. The desperate move of men who felt their control slipping. Jim smiled, sending a group text to his allies. It's time. Tomorrow we show our hand. The responses came quickly. Sarah, articles ready. Margaret, documents prepared. Laura, property records confirmed. Diane, witnesses lined up. Years of corruption were about to unravel. Rick, Trish, and their conspirators thought they were tightening their grip on power. Instead, they were sealing their own fate. And Jim Harper would be there to watch it all burn down. Chapter 5, Breaking Points. The morning headlines hit like bombs across Willow Creek. Sarah Chen's investigative series, published simultaneously in 3 major newspapers, exposed the full scope of Rick Donovan's corruption network. The first article detailed the protection racket targeting small businesses. The second revealed the real estate conspiracy involving Harvey Klein. The third, the most damaging, exposed how city funds have been funneled through shell companies. Rick's phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. We need to contain this, he barked into his cell. Call Klein, tell him. Klein's not taking your calls, Trish interrupted. None of our allies are. They sat in Rick's private office, watching their carefully constructed world crumble. On his desk, printouts of Sarah's articles lay scattered like evidence at a crime scene. This is Harper written all over it, Rick growled. He must have been planning this for months. You said you had him handled. Trisha's composure cracked. The business owners were supposed to support you. The properties were supposed to be secure. They were. Nobody knew about the safe houses except... Rick's face darkened. Margaret Hayes, your interior designer? Trisha's laugh held a hysterical edge. The woman you dumped for me? She knew the layouts, the security systems. Rick grabbed his phone again. Give me Klein. Now. But Harvey Klein had problems of his own. The developer sat in his corner office, watching protesters gather outside his building. Signs bearing slogans like "Stop the Corruption" and "Klein's Criminal Empire" filled the street. His assistant buzzed through. Sir? The investors are demanding an emergency meeting. Klein stared at his computer screen, where emails from panicked partners piled up. 3 major projects faced immediate suspension. The zoning changes Rick had promised remained stalled. Get Donovan on the line, he ordered. He's been calling all morning, sir. Not Rick. James Harper. Across town, Madison Harper's phone exploded with notifications. Her social media posts attacking her father had backfired spectacularly. Comments pointed to Sarah's articles, questioning her story. Former friends distanced themselves, afraid of being associated with the scandal. Mom, she called out, panic rising. They're saying things about us online. About Rick, about the investments. Trish didn't answer. She sat in their temporary apartment, surrounded by newspapers. The evidence was overwhelming. Photos, documents, witness statements. Jim hadn't just gathered proof. He'd orchestrated a symphony of destruction. Her phone buzzed with a text from Helen, her aunt. How could you? That was my retirement money. More messages followed. Family members, friends, social connections, all demanding explanations about their investments. The guaranteed returns Rick had promised now looked like nothing more than a sophisticated scam. At the country club, Margaret Hayes sipped champagne and watched Rick's world implode. Laura Bennett and Diane Carter joined her, each bringing new updates about the fallout. The Ethics Commission is launching an investigation, Diane reported. They're focusing on the campaign finances first. Laura checked her phone. 3 banks have frozen accounts connected to Klein's properties. The paper trail leads straight to Rick's shell companies. Ladies, Jim Harper approached their table. Thank you for your help. We're not finished, Margaret replied. There's more to come. Indeed, there was. By noon, Mark Thompson had walked into the district attorney's office, ready to testify about money laundering through Harper Landscaping's accounts. Elizabeth had convinced him to turn state's evidence, protecting himself before Rick's empire dragged him down. The pressure broke people in different ways. Klein barricaded himself in his office, refusing all calls except from his lawyers. Rick oscillated between rage and panic, destroying documents even as police obtained warrants to seize them. But Trisha's breakdown proved most spectacular. She tried rallying support among her social circle, only to find doors literally and figuratively closed. Former friends blocked her calls. Party invitations disappeared. The carefully cultivated image she'd built over years shattered in hours. Your father's ruining everything, she screamed at Madison. All our plans, all our work. You said he was stupid. Madison shouted back. You said he'd never figure it out. Their argument, captured by neighbors' phones, spread across social media. Mother and daughter, once united in their plot against Jim, now turned on each other as their world collapsed. The final blow came from Rachel. Jim's half-sister had gathered evidence of Trish and Madison's manipulation of elderly relatives. The investment scheme wasn't just unethical, it was criminal fraud. Police arrived at their apartment that evening. The sight of Trish Harper and Madison being escorted out made local news. Rick, watching from his office, realized his political career was over. Jim observed it all from a distance, coordinating with his allies. Sarah's articles continued dropping bombshells. Margaret and the others provided steady streams of evidence to investigators. The web of corruption, once hidden in shadow, now lay exposed to harsh light. Klein wants to talk, Vinny reported. Says he can provide documentation of city contracts, kickbacks, everything. Let him stew, Jim replied. He's not our primary target. But Rick Donovan wasn't waiting to be taken down. As night fell, security cameras caught him removing boxes from his office. He loaded his SUV, made calls from burner phones. Jim's phone lit up with alerts. Rick had booked a private flight, transferred funds to offshore accounts. The mayor was planning to run. Should we stop him? Sarah asked. Jim smiled. No need. The FBI's waiting at the airport. Years of corruption unraveled in a single day. Rick's arrest made national news. Klein's empire faced federal investigation. Trish and Madison's scheme to defraud relatives resulted in multiple charges. And Jim Harper watched it all unfold, exactly as he'd planned. The evidence had been overwhelming, the timing perfect. His enemies had believed themselves invulnerable, never suspecting they were merely players in his longer game. The breaking points had come, shattering their illusions of power. But for Jim, this was just the beginning. The real victory lay not in their destruction, but in what would rise from their ruins. Chapter 6. The Final Pieces. Rachel Harper stood in the bank's conference room, presenting evidence to stunned executives. The investment scheme Trish and Madison had pushed on family members wasn't just local. It extended through multiple states, involving dozens of victims. These signatures were forged, she explained, highlighting documents on the screen. They used their personal relationships to bypass normal verification procedures. The bankers exchanged worried glances. One raised his hand. How much money are we talking about? Conservative estimate? $15 million. Rachel pulled up more slides, all funneled through accounts connected to Rick Donovan's shell companies. Across town, Sarah Chun interviewed another victim. Stephen Chun, no relation, owner of Golden Dragon Restaurant, described years of harassment from city officials. They threatened my licenses, he said, hands shaking. Said health inspectors would shut me down unless I supported the mayor's campaign. Similar stories emerged across Willow Creek. Business owners, freed from fear, came forward with evidence of extortion. Each testimony strengthened the case against Rick and his conspirators. At the foundation of it all sat Harvey Klein, watching his real estate empire crumble. Federal agents swarmed his offices, seizing computers and documents. The developer had finally agreed to cooperate, but his information came too late to save himself. Harper played us, Klein admitted to his lawyers. While we thought we were pressuring him, he was documenting everything. Building a case? The evidence proved overwhelming. Klein's properties, purchased above market value, have been financed through a complex web of fraudulent loans. The shell companies, the safe houses, the kickbacks, everything connected back to Rick Donovan's administration. Madison, facing her own legal troubles, turned on her mother. In exchange for leniency, she provided detailed accounts of how Trish had orchestrated their schemes. She said Dad was weak, Madison told investigators. Said he didn't deserve his success. Rick promised he'd take care of us once they forced Dad out. The betrayal struck Trish hard. Held in county jail, she watched her daughter's testimony on the news. The carefully constructed facade of family unity shattered completely. Jim monitored these developments from his office, coordinating with his network of allies. Margaret Hayes provided records of more safe house renovations. Laura Bennett traced property transfers to offshore accounts. Diane Carter revealed how campaign funds had been laundered through charitable donations. The FBI wants to interview all of us, Margaret reported during their daily meeting. They're building a RICO case. Give them everything, Jim instructed. Hold nothing back. Mark Thompson's cooperation proved particularly valuable. His testimony detailed how Rick had leveraged gambling debts to infiltrate Harper Landscaping's finances. He wanted access to Jim's client list, Mark explained to prosecutors. Said he could pressure them into supporting his campaigns. Elizabeth stood by her husband through his confession, helping him document years of manipulation. Their evidence strengthened the case against Rick while exposing the full scope of his corruption. The investigation expanded beyond Willow Creek. Other communities reported similar patterns of corruption involving Klein's properties and Donovan's political connections. The local scandal had exposed a regional criminal enterprise. Rachel's banking expertise proved crucial in unraveling the financial aspects. She traced money movements through multiple institutions, documenting how Rick had hidden his illegal gains. He didn't just steal from the city, she explained to Jim. He created a system for laundering money from multiple criminal operations. Sarah's articles continued making waves. Each revelation brought new witnesses forward. Each testimony added weight to the prosecution's case. The journalist had finally found the career-defining story she'd sought. People need to understand how this happened, she told Jim. How they got away with it for so long. Jim agreed, providing her with complete access to his evidence. The resulting series would later win multiple awards, exposing how corruption could infect an entire community. Through it all, Jim maintained his focus on the larger goal. The arrests and exposures weren't just about revenge. They represented an opportunity to rebuild Willow Creek's integrity. His phone buzzed with updates throughout the day. Federal agents raiding more properties. Prosecutors filing additional charges. Victims coming forward with new evidence. Rick facing multiple federal indictments. Trish and Madison's fraud scheme expanding. Klein's empire facing bankruptcy proceedings. Each development strengthened his position while devastating his enemies. The plan, crafted over months of careful preparation, had succeeded beyond his expectations. We found something interesting in Klein's records, Vinny reported late that evening. Looks like he was working with a bigger organization out of Chicago. Jim studied the documents Vinny had brought. Bank transfers, coded messages, meetings with unnamed associates, all pointing to connections beyond Willow Creek. Have you shared this with the FBI? Not yet. Vinny tapped the folders. Thought you should see it first. These Chicago people, they're not the type you want to cross without preparation. Jim considered the implications. The Chicago connection explained how Klein had accessed such significant funding for his properties. It also presented a new level of threat. Make copies, he instructed. Then make sure this reaches the right federal agents. Sarah arrived as Vinny left, carrying fresh printouts of tomorrow's articles. The prosecution's offering plea deals, she reported. Rick's lawyers are considering options. He won't take a deal, Jim predicted. His ego won't let him. What about Trish? She'll try to negotiate. Use Madison as leverage for sympathy. The strategy proved accurate. Within hours, Trish's lawyers contacted the district attorney, offering testimony against Rick in exchange for reduced charges. Madison, learning of her mother's attempt to bargain with her future, broke down during a police interview. She revealed details about their planning sessions with Rick, including discussions about framing Jim for embezzlement. He was supposed to protect us, she sobbed to investigators. Mom said he'd handle everything once Dad was gone. The betrayal cut deep on both sides. Trish, hearing of Madison's confession, attempted to recant her offer to testify. But the damage was done. Prosecutors now had confirmation of their conspiracy from multiple sources. Rick responded to the mounting evidence by attacking his former allies. Through his lawyers, he claimed Klein had masterminded the entire operation, using political blackmail to control city development. Klein retaliated by releasing records of their meetings, including video footage from the safe houses. The developer had apparently maintained his own insurance policy against betrayal. They're turning on each other, Margaret observed during an update meeting. Just like you predicted. Jim nodded, watching the destruction unfold. His enemies, once united in their plot against him, now fought amongst themselves like trapped animals. Rachel called with news from the banking investigation. The fraud goes deeper than we thought. They weren't just targeting our family. There are victims in 3 states. Document everything, Jim instructed. The federal prosecutors will want solid evidence for additional charges. The scope of corruption had grown beyond anyone's initial estimates. What began as a personal vendetta had exposed criminal networks operating throughout the region. Sarah's final article of the day detailed the human cost. Families devastated by fraud, businesses destroyed by extortion, lives ruined by unchecked corruption. The story painted a devastating picture of power abused and trust betrayed. As night fell over Willow Creek, Jim reviewed the day's developments with his core team. Margaret, Laura, and Diane provided updates on ongoing investigations. Rachel reported on financial trails still being uncovered. Sarah outlined upcoming articles exposing more aspects of the conspiracy. Klein's properties are being seized, Laura reported. The banks are foreclosing on anything the feds haven't taken. Rick's political allies are scrambling to distance themselves, Diane added. His support networks completely collapsed. And Trish? Margaret asked. Isolated, Jim replied. Her social circles abandoned her. The country club canceled her membership this morning. The pieces had fallen exactly as planned. His enemies faced not just legal consequences, but complete social and financial ruin. Their attempts to destroy him had instead ensured their own destruction. Vinny's final report of the night confirmed their success. Rick's attempt to flee had been thwarted at the airport, federal agents waiting at the gate. The mayor's arrest, captured on security cameras, showed him in handcuffs being led past shocked travelers. The Chicago connections got them spooked, Vinny noted. They're treating this as part of a larger RICO investigation. Jim sat in his study, surrounded by evidence of his triumph. The screens showed news coverage of Rick's arrest, Klein's properties being raided, Trish and Madison's fraud scheme unraveling. A lifetime of corruption exposed in a matter of days. But he felt no celebration, no joy in their downfall. This had never been about revenge alone. It was about justice, about protecting others from experiencing similar betrayals. The final pieces had fallen into place, the trap sprung perfectly. His enemies would face consequences far beyond what they'd imagined possible. Their world, built on lies and manipulation, had crumbled completely. And Jim Harper, the man they'd thought to destroy, stood stronger than ever amidst the ruins of their ambition. Chapter 7. Rebuilding from the Ashes. Jim sat across from Dr. Emily Carter in her office, reviewing plans for the Foundation's newest initiative. The psychologist's expertise in trauma recovery had proven invaluable in developing programs for victims of corruption. These support groups are making a real difference, Emily said, highlighting sections of her report, especially for the elderly victims of the investment fraud. Aunt Helen joined one last week, Jim noted. Rachel says she's starting to trust people again. Emily nodded, her professional demeanor softening. Rebuilding trust takes time, but having you and Rachel actively involved in the recovery process helps. It shows them not everyone in positions of power is corrupt. The Foundation had exceeded initial expectations. What began as a response to local corruption had evolved into a regional center for accountability and recovery. Sarah Chen's investigative work continued drawing attention to similar cases across the state. The Chicago Tribune wants to run my series, Sarah announced, entering Jim's office later that day. They're seeing parallel patterns in other communities. How's the book coming along? Final edits. Sarah pulled up a document on her tablet. The publisher wants to fast-track it. They think the timing's perfect with Rick's trial approaching. The mayor's arrest had sparked a wave of reforms in Willow Creek. Local businesses, once pressured into supporting corrupt officials, now proudly displayed certificates from the Foundation's ethics program. Mark Thompson, having completed his testimony against Rick, worked with Elizabeth to rebuild their section of Harper Landscaping. Their new initiative, Green Futures, provided job training for at-risk youth. We've got 15 kids in the current class, Mark reported during their weekly meeting. 3 already have job offers from landscaping firms. Make sure they understand business ethics, Jim instructed. We're not just teaching them trade skills. Elizabeth nodded, adding notes to her tablet. We've incorporated lessons from the Foundation's certification program. They're learning about transparency, accountability, proper record keeping. The transformation extended beyond business practices. Rachel's banking expertise had helped establish new protocols for detecting fraud, particularly schemes targeting vulnerable populations. 2 banks adopted our guidelines this month, Rachel reported, pride evident in her voice. They've already flagged several suspicious patterns similar to what Trish and Madison attempted. The mention of his former family didn't sting as it once had. Jim had channeled that pain into creating systems preventing others from experiencing similar betrayals. Speaking of prevention, Emily interjected, the mentorship program's ready to launch. We've paired successful professionals with children of incarcerated white-collar criminals. The initiative held special meaning for Jim. He'd seen how Madison's entitlement and Trish's manipulation had corrupted his daughter's values. The program aimed to break that cycle. Margaret Hayes led the Foundation's community outreach, turning her design skills toward creating welcoming spaces for support groups and educational programs. We've transformed 3 of Rick's former safe houses, she explained, showing renovation plans. The irony of using them for victim support services feels appropriate. Laura Bennett and Diane Carter manage the Foundation's property division, helping victims recover assets lost to corruption schemes. Their knowledge of real estate fraud proved invaluable in navigating complex cases. Klein's seized properties are being converted into affordable housing, Laura reported. The federal forfeiture program approved our proposal last week. Diane pulled up a map on the conference room screen. We're focusing on neighborhoods most affected by their corruption, creating community centers, job training facilities, counseling spaces. Jim studied the locations, noting how they aligned with areas once targeted by Rick's protection racket. The transformation felt symbolic. Spaces once used for exploitation, now serving community recovery. Stephen Chun, whose Golden Dragon restaurant had nearly been destroyed by Rick's extortion, now hosted monthly meetings for business owners learning to recognize and resist corruption. We must teach others what to watch for, he told Jim during one session. The signs were there, but we didn't know how to read them. The Foundation's headquarters buzzed with activity. Former victims trained as peer counselors. Whistleblowers shared experiences with ethics committees. Law enforcement officials conducted workshops on recognizing corruption patterns. Sarah's ongoing investigation had revealed similar networks in neighboring communities. The Foundation provided resources and expertise to local groups fighting their own battles against corruption. It's like watching dominoes fall, Vinny observed during one of his regular visits. Each exposed scheme leads to another. The Chicago connection opened up whole new investigations. Jim's personal life had evolved alongside his professional mission. His relationship with Emily developed naturally, built on shared values and genuine understanding. You've turned pain into purpose, she told him during dinner at his home. That's rare. Most people either break or become bitter. I had help, he acknowledged. People who believed in something bigger than revenge. The Foundation's influence continued growing. Corporate partners, attracted by its success in promoting ethical practices, provided funding for expanded programs. Government agencies sought consultation on anti-corruption initiatives. Rachel oversaw the financial aspects, ensuring transparent operations that contrasted sharply with the schemes they fought against. We're not just teaching ethics, she explained to potential partners. We're demonstrating them through our own practices. Mark and Elizabeth's Green Futures program graduated its first class, celebrating in the Foundation's community space. Young people who might have been drawn into corruption now spoke passionately about business integrity. Mr. Harper taught us success doesn't require hurting others, one graduate declared in his speech. We can build something meaningful while helping our community grow. The Foundation's headquarters had become a symbol of resilience. People entered seeking help and emerged empowered to create positive change. The transformation extended beyond individuals to the entire community's fabric. Jim watched it all from his office, satisfaction replacing the anger that once drove him. The Foundation represented more than victory over his enemies. It embodied the possibility of genuine reform. Emily joined him at the window, their reflection overlapping with the view of the city below. Ready for tomorrow's board meetings? He nodded, thinking of the new initiatives they'd discuss. The Foundation had evolved beyond his initial vision, becoming a force for positive change that would outlast any personal vendetta. We're just getting started, he replied, seeing not the ruins of his enemy's ambitions, but the foundations of something far more valuable, a legacy of integrity that would help others avoid the pain of betrayal. Chapter 8. Justice Served, Lessons Learned. The federal courthouse buzzed with activity as Rick Donovan's trial began. Journalists packed the gallery, Sarah Chin among them, documenting a case that had captured national attention. All rise, the bailiff called out as Judge Miranda Patterson entered. The proceedings that followed would expose the full scope of corruption that had plagued Willow Creek. Prosecutor Alexandra Torres laid out the government's case. The evidence will show a systematic abuse of power spanning years. Mr. Donovan didn't just betray public trust. He created an enterprise dedicated to corruption. Rick sat between his lawyers, his once commanding presence diminished by an orange jumpsuit. His eyes darted between familiar faces in the courtroom. Former allies now turned witnesses against him. Mark Thompson's testimony came first, detailing how gambling debts made him vulnerable to manipulation. They knew exactly how to pressure people, he explained. Find their weaknesses, exploit their fears. Elizabeth supported her husband from the gallery, nodding encouragement as he exposed years of corruption. Their courage in coming forward had inspired others to break their silence. Harvey Klein testified next, having accepted a plea deal. The developer described how Rick's political influence had been essential to their scheme. We created a system, Klein admitted. Used city inspections to pressure businesses, forced them to support his campaigns, launder the money through my properties. The prosecution presented Sarah's investigative reports as evidence, along with documentation Jim had gathered. Each piece revealed another layer of corruption. Margaret Hayes testified about the safe houses, her architectural expertise lending weight to the prosecution's case. These weren't just meeting places, she explained, pointing to blueprints. They were designed for surveillance, document storage, intimidation. Laura Bennett and Diane Carter corroborated her testimony, providing records of property transactions and campaign finances that prove money laundering. The pattern was deliberate, Diane testified. Each property purchase corresponded with increased pressure on local businesses. Trish's testimony proved particularly damaging. Facing her own charges, she detailed Rick's manipulation of both personal relationships and political power. He promised me everything, she said, avoiding Jim's gaze in the gallery. A future in politics, social status, financial security. But it was all built on corruption. Madison watched her mother's testimony via video link from the juvenile facility where she awaited her own sentencing. Her statement to investigators had exposed how Rick groomed younger people for roles in his schemes. The trial revealed connections to larger criminal networks. FBI agents testified about links to organized crime in Chicago, explaining how Rick's operation fit into regional patterns of corruption. Mr. Donovan's activities weren't isolated, Special Agent Roberts explained. He created a template other corrupt officials could follow. Jim's testimony focused on the systematic nature of the corruption. He presented evidence showing how Rick's organization had targeted businesses, manipulated relationships, and exploited vulnerabilities. They didn't just break laws, he told the jury. They broke trust. They made people believe corruption was the only way to survive. Rachel provided expert testimony on the financial aspects, explaining how legitimate banking systems had been subverted for criminal purposes. The schemes were sophisticated, she demonstrated, walking the jury through complex transactions. But they all served one purpose, converting public resources into private gain. Stephen Chun and other business owners described years of harassment and extortion. Their testimonies painted a picture of widespread intimidation that had silenced an entire community. We felt helpless, Stephen explained. City inspectors would appear, find violations, demand support for the mayor's campaign. If we refused, the pressure increased. The evidence proved overwhelming. Bank records, surveillance footage, witness testimony, and documented patterns of corruption left no room for doubt. Judge Patterson's ruling reflected the case's severity. Mr. Donovan, you've betrayed not just your office, but the fundamental trust between government and citizens. Rick received 25 years in federal prison. The sentence sent a clear message about the consequences of systematic corruption. Trish faced her own judgment days later. The fraud charges, combined with conspiracy counts, resulted in a 15-year sentence. Her attempts to blame others had backfired, revealing deeper involvement in the criminal enterprise. Madison's case concluded in juvenile court. The judge, considering her age and cooperation, ordered 3 years of probation and mandatory counseling. Her public apology, though clearly coached by lawyers, acknowledged the damage caused by their actions. The foundation monitored the proceedings, documenting lessons for future anti-corruption efforts. Emily developed programs specifically addressing the psychological impacts of betrayal and fraud. These cases show how corruption poisons relationships, she explained during a foundation seminar. We need to heal both institutional and personal trust. Sarah's coverage earned journalism awards, bringing national attention to the issue of systemic corruption. Her book became required reading in public policy courses. The trials changed Willow Creek's political landscape. New leaders emerged, committed to transparency and accountability. The Foundation's certification program became a standard for evaluating public officials. Jim watched the transformation from his office, seeing justice served not just through punishment, but through systemic change. The lessons learned would help prevent future generations from facing similar betrayals. The Foundation's work continued, stronger for having witnessed both corruption's power and the courage required to fight it. The trials hadn't just ended criminal careers. They'd launched a movement for integrity that would influence communities far beyond Willow Creek. Chapter 9: A New Dawn. The Foundation's headquarters pulsed with activity as Jim reviewed plans for Integrity Park with the landscaping team. The space, once a vacant lot near Klein's seized properties, would become a living monument to community renewal. "We've incorporated teaching gardens," Mark explained, pointing to the designs. "Each section demonstrates sustainable practices. The students from Green Futures will maintain them." Elizabeth added, "The community response has been incredible. Local businesses are donating materials, volunteers signing up for planting days." The park represented more than beautification. Educational exhibits would tell the story of Willow Creek's transformation, teaching future generations about corruption's costs and the power of collective action. Rachel joined them, carrying reports from the latest banking initiative. 3 more institutions adopted our fraud prevention protocols. They're already identifying suspicious patterns we saw with Trish's scheme. "How are the elder support groups doing?" Jim asked. "Growing weekly. Aunt Helen's become quite the advocate. She's helping others recognize manipulation tactics." The Foundation's influence had spread beyond its original scope. Corporate partners sought their expertise in establishing ethical business practices. Government agencies requested consultation on anti-corruption measures. Emily arrived for their afternoon meeting. Her presence bringing a warmth Jim had thought lost forever. Their relationship had developed naturally, built on shared values and mutual respect. "The mentorship program's expanding," she reported. "We've matched 30 at-risk youth with business leaders. The preliminary results are promising." Sarah Chin burst in, waving a newspaper. The Chicago Tribune series launched today. They're calling it the Willow Creek Effect: How One Community's Fight Against Corruption Inspired Regional Reform. The article detailed how the Foundation's methods had been adopted by other communities battling similar issues. Their approach, combining accountability with rehabilitation, offered a new model for addressing systemic corruption. Margaret Hayes led them on a tour of the latest renovated safe house. The former surveillance room now hosted support group meetings. Document storage vaults had become counseling offices. "We're turning spaces of fear into places of healing," she noted, showing them the community meeting area. Laura and Diane have similar projects starting in 3 other locations. The transformation extended throughout Willow Creek. Stephen Chin's restaurant hosted monthly ethics workshops for small business owners. Former victims trained as peer counselors, helping others navigate recovery from fraud and betrayal. "Mr. Harper?" A young voice interrupted their tour. One of the Green Future students stood in the doorway. "Could you speak at our graduation next week? We want to share how the program changed our lives." Jim agreed, remembering his own journey from victim to mentor. The Foundation had become more than a response to betrayal. It was a catalyst for positive change. Vinny dropped by with updates from his law enforcement contacts. "The Chicago investigations keep expanding. Your Foundation's evidence-gathering methods are becoming standard procedure." The retired investigator had found new purpose training others to recognize corruption patterns. His experience proved invaluable in developing prevention strategies. Back in his office, Jim reviewed the Foundation's latest initiatives with Emily. Their wedding plans had evolved to include a fundraiser for expanding youth programs. "You've built something remarkable," she observed. "Not just the Foundation, but a whole community of people dedicated to positive change." "We build it together," he corrected. "Everyone who chose integrity over fear, truth over comfort." The Foundation's weekly newsletter, Building Integrity, reached subscribers nationwide. Rachel's financial literacy programs helped individuals and businesses recognize manipulation tactics. Mark and Elizabeth's Green Futures graduates brought ethical practices to companies across the region. Sarah's book had become a catalyst for reform in other communities. She regularly conducted workshops, helping local journalists investigate corruption. It's not just about exposing wrongdoing, she explained during a training session. It's about showing people they have power to create change. The foundation's headquarters had become a symbol of transformation. Former victims found support and purpose. Whistleblowers shared experiences with ethics committees. Law enforcement officials learned new investigation techniques. Jim watched a group of students touring the building, listening to Margaret explain how architecture could promote transparency and community engagement. The designs emphasize openness, she told them. No hidden spaces, no rooms for secrets. We learn from past mistakes to build better futures. Laura and Diane led workshops on recognizing real estate fraud, turning their experience with Klein's schemes into practical prevention tools. Knowledge is protection, Diane often said. When people understand how corruption works, they're less likely to become victims. The foundation's influence continued growing organically. Each success story inspired others to seek help or offer support. Corporate partners recognized that ethical practices brought sustainable success. Emily joined Jim on the rooftop garden, another Green Futures project. Below them, Integrity Park took shape as workers installed educational exhibits and planted gardens. Ready for tomorrow's board meeting? She asked. We're reviewing proposals for 3 new programs. Jim nodded, seeing not just buildings and parks but a community transformed. The foundation had evolved beyond his initial vision, becoming a force for positive change that would outlast any personal vendetta. We're just getting started, he replied, understanding now that true victory lay not in destroying enemies but in building something lasting, a legacy of integrity that would help others avoid the pain of betrayal. Looking out over Willow Creek, Jim saw a city renewed. The scars of corruption remained, but they'd become markers of resilience rather than wounds. Each renovated building, each new program, each person helped represented another step toward lasting change. The foundation's work would continue, growing stronger through shared purpose and collective wisdom. They'd learned that fighting corruption required more than exposing wrongdoing. It meant creating systems and communities that promoted integrity. As sunset painted the sky, Jim and Emily reviewed plans for tomorrow's initiatives. The foundation had become more than a response to betrayal. It was a testament to human resilience, a proof that even the deepest wounds could spark powerful healing. The new dawn had arrived, not just for Jim Harper, but for all those who chose to build something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. In that purpose, they'd found something far more valuable than revenge. They'd found hope. Epilogue. 10 years later, Jim Harper stood at the podium in the Foundation's main auditorium, addressing the 10th anniversary celebration of the Willow Creek Initiative. At 52, his hair showed touches of gray, but his presence commanded attention from the packed audience. A decade ago, we faced a choice, he began, scanning familiar faces in the crowd. Let corruption destroy our community, or build something stronger from its ashes. Today, we celebrate not just survival, but transformation. The Foundation had expanded beyond its original mission. What started as a response to local corruption had grown into a national organization with offices in 12 cities. Their model of combining accountability with rehabilitation had revolutionized anti-corruption efforts across the country. Emily Harper, née Carter, sat in the front row, their 8-year-old twins, Thomas and Claire, fidgeting beside her. Their marriage 6 years ago had merged personal healing with professional purpose. Emily now directed the Foundation's Psychological Services Division, developing programs that addressed the human cost of corruption. The twins are just like Jim was at that age, Rachel whispered to Sarah Chun, who'd returned from Washington, D.C. for the anniversary. Always watching, always figuring things out. Sarah nodded, thinking of her own journey. Her book about the Willow Creek scandal had launched a successful career investigating corruption nationwide. She testified before Congress multiple times, helping shape anti-corruption legislation named after their initiative. Speaking of watching, Sarah replied, "Did you see the latest figures from your banking program?" Rachel, now heading the Foundation's Financial Integrity Division, had transformed their early fraud prevention protocols into a comprehensive system adopted by major banks nationwide. Her work had prevented countless schemes similar to what Trish and Madison had attempted. 37% reduction in elder fraud cases last year, Rachel confirmed proudly. The predictive models are getting better at catching manipulation patterns. Mark and Elizabeth Thompson sat nearby, their Green Futures program having expanded to 50 cities. The initiative had graduated thousands of students, creating a new generation of business leaders committed to ethical practices. Their own son, now in college, was studying environmental law. Dad still visits the original teaching gardens, Mark told anyone who'd listen. Says they remind him why we started all this. Margaret Hayes, Laura Bennett, and Diane Carter had grown their programs beyond anyone's expectations. The three women had become known as the Integrity Architects, consulting with organizations worldwide on creating transparent, community-focused spaces. Remember Rick's old safe houses? Margaret mused during the reception. Now they're community centers, counseling spaces, training facilities. The transformation feels poetic. Stephen Chen's Golden Dragon restaurant had become a landmark, its walls displaying photos documenting Willow Creek's journey. His monthly business ethics workshops had grown into a certified training program required for local business licenses. "My daughter teaches the courses now," he shared proudly. "She starts each session with our story, how staying silent about corruption nearly cost us everything." Vinnie Moretti, though officially retired, still maintained connections with law enforcement agencies. The investigation methods he developed had become standard procedure in corruption cases nationwide. "Those Chicago connections we uncovered," he reminded Jim during a quiet moment, "led to reforms in 6 states. Sometimes pulling one thread unravels the whole sweater." The Foundation's headquarters had expanded to occupy an entire city block. Integrity Park, once a simple garden space, now featured interactive exhibits teaching visitors about corruption's warning signs and community resistance strategies. Rick Donovan remained in federal prison, his appeals exhausted. The mayor's downfall had become a case study in public administration courses, teaching future leaders about power's corrupting influence. Trish had served 8 years of her sentence before being released on parole. She lived quietly in another state, working at a small accounting firm under strict supervision. Her attempts to contact Jim over the years had gone unanswered. Some bridges couldn't be rebuilt. Madison's story had taken an unexpected turn. After completing probation and therapy, she'd chosen to work with troubled teens, using her experience to warn others about manipulation's dangers. Though reconciliation with Jim remained distant, she occasionally contributed anonymously to the Foundation's youth programs. Harvey Klein had died in prison 3 years into his sentence, but his case had exposed corruption networks in multiple cities. The Klein investigations, as they became known, had led to reforms in real estate development and municipal contracting nationwide. The Foundation's influence extended far beyond its original scope. Corporate partners sought their certification, which had become a recognized standard for ethical business practices. Government agencies regularly consulted them on anti-corruption initiatives. 10 years ago, Jim continued in his speech, someone asked me what victory looked like. I thought it meant watching our enemies fall. I was wrong. Victory is watching communities rise. He gestured to the audience, acknowledging the network of allies and supporters who transformed personal vengeance into public good. Today, we measure success not in convictions, but in connections. Not in retribution, but in reformation. Each person helped, each system improved, each community strengthened represents a victory over corruption's influence. The Foundation's weekly newsletter, now reaching millions of subscribers, shared success stories and prevention strategies. Rachel's financial literacy programs had become standard curriculum in schools nationwide. Mark and Elizabeth's Green Futures model had been adapted for various industries, creating ethical business leaders across sectors. Sarah's investigative methods had been adopted by newsrooms throughout the country. Her training programs helped journalists recognize and expose corruption patterns while protecting vulnerable sources. The Willow Creek Effect, as it became known in academic circles, demonstrated how local resistance to corruption could spark regional reform. Case studies of their approach appeared in business schools and public policy programs worldwide. Emily's psychological insights had revolutionized understanding of corruption's impact on communities. Her research showed how transparency and accountability could rebuild trust in damaged institutions. We found that healing requires more than exposing wrongdoing, she explained to visiting researchers. It needs systematic change, community engagement, and personal transformation. The Foundation's headquarters hosted regular conferences, bringing together anti-corruption experts from around the world. Their approach, combining accountability with rehabilitation, had created a new paradigm for addressing systemic corruption. Jim and Emily's children grew up surrounded by these principles. Thomas showed his father's determination and his mother's empathy, while Claire inherited Rachel's financial acumen and Sarah's investigative instincts. They asked about those times. Emily told Jim one evening in their home office. About Trish, Madison, everything that happened. They need to understand, Jim replied. Not for vengeance, but for vigilance. The Foundation's success had proven that positive change could emerge from betrayal's ashes. Each renovated building, each reformed system, each person helped represented another victory over corruption's influence. As Jim concluded his anniversary speech, he reflected on the journey from victim to visionary. The Foundation had become more than a response to personal betrayal. It was a testament to human resilience and community power. Looking forward, he addressed the audience. Our work continues. Corruption evolves, finding new vulnerabilities to exploit. But so do we. Each lesson learned, each life touched, each community transformed strengthens our collective resistance. The applause that followed celebrated not just survival but evolution. The Foundation had grown beyond its founder's vision, becoming a force for positive change that would influence generations. Later that evening, Jim walked through Integrity Park with Emily and the twins. The teaching gardens bloomed with summer flowers, maintained by the latest Green Futures class. Educational exhibits guided visitors through Willow Creek's transformation, showing how community action could overcome corruption's influence. Dad, Claire asked, pointing to an old photograph. Is that why you started all this? Jim studied the image. Himself, younger and angry, standing amid the ruins of his former life. That's how it began, he answered. But this is why we continue. He gestured to the park around them, to the Foundation's buildings beyond, to the city that had risen stronger from betrayal's ashes. Sometimes, he told his children, the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things we do. The trick is choosing to build rather than break. The lesson echoed the Foundation's core message. True victory lay not in destroying enemies, but in creating something lasting, a legacy of integrity that would help others avoid betrayal's pain while building stronger communities. As sunset painted the sky, Jim watched his family explore the park's newest exhibits. The Foundation's work would continue, growing stronger through shared purpose and collective wisdom. They'd learned that fighting corruption required more than exposing wrongdoing. It meant creating systems and communities that promoted integrity. 10 years had transformed personal vengeance into public good, individual pain into community healing. The Foundation stood as proof that even the deepest wounds could spark powerful change when guided by purpose rather than revenge. The next decade would bring new challenges, new forms of corruption to fight. But the Foundation's network, built on trust, transparency, and transformation, stood ready to meet them. In that shared commitment to integrity, they'd found something far more valuable than revenge. They'd found hope, and through it, they'd build a future stronger than any betrayal could break. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.